Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PR Explored, the PR podcast where we delve into trends and topics related to public relations. I'm your host, Michelle Garrett, a PR consultant and writer. And my guest today is my friend and crisis communications expert, Shawna Bruce. Welcome, Shawna.
Thank you, Michelle. It's always so great to be with you and your network and friends. So thanks for the invitation.
I love you so much. I love what you share on LinkedIn, and I'm just so glad. And you've been here before with me, and I really appreciate you coming back because I'm always like, there's so much crisis in the news all the time now that every time something happens, I'm always like, what would Shawna say? What would Shawna do?
Shawna's probably rolling her eyes saying that was preventable. But not always in today's environment. But I always appreciate the invitation because we connected on LinkedIn, and I think it's another great example of the amazing network of largely women, female entrepreneurs that are in the communication space, that are empowering and supporting one another with the different avenues that we take to specialize in. So I appreciate the invite back. That means it didn't go too badly last time. So thank you.
No, I think like I said, you're one of the people on LinkedIn that I think really shares valuable stuff. Not that others don't, but it's never AI generated junk. It's always like, on point, and it's just there's so much to talk about in your field. So but not everybody has as much experience and perspective. So I appreciate that. And as on that note, can you just share a little bit? And I will put a couple links in here for people to
Sure.
follow and connect with you. Just tell us about your background and anything you want to share before we kind of dive in here. So.
Well, my name is Shawna Bruce, and I am calling in today from Alberta, Canada. That's where I live. And I always appreciate these opportunities to engage with Michelle and her audiences, because I think that she has one of the most stellar careers in PR. She talks about me sharing learnings, but she does absolutely the same. I learn as much from her every day on what she shares on LinkedIn and the different connections she's made with this podcast. So I'm very honored to be here. I have been working in communications for 40 years. It's a long time. I laughed because at a workshop not too long ago, I shared that I can still remember when we used to drive news releases around when I worked in Ottawa for National Defence Headquarters, and we would physically drop off news releases to the newsrooms. I mean, that's a long time ago. So I have seen a lot of different communications challenges, tools, technologies come in and out of this realm of work that we do. I started my career in the military as a civilian first, and then in uniform, and did Army Public Affairs for over 25 years. I'm a graduate of DINFOS in the US, of the Defense Information School back in the day. And then when I left the military or was looking to retire, I realized I did a lot of issues and crisis management in uniform. So this is honestly what happened. I went to the Google and I said, Issues and Crisis Management Masters, and up popped this program for disaster and emergency management at Royal Roads in Victoria here in Canada. And I thought, I've supported a lot of those kinds of deployments. I'd like to do that. So then I kind of switched gears and started to specialize in this arena. Then I went to work at Dow Chemical for 8.5 years, managing public relations across our Canadian sites and the headquarters in Calgary. But I had an introduction to risk communications and making neighbors aware of worst case scenarios and how to protect themselves and their families through emergency communications. So I kind of got into that arena. When I decided to retire and hang out my own shingle, I was invited back to do more teaching in that space. How do we prepare people to better respond in a crisis? I maybe was a little naive that I didn't realize when I left the Army or the military, I thought everyone got these skills in their training. But I quickly realized they do not. It's a specialized skill set. Mm-hmm. And when I left industry, that skill set was still needed. And a friend asked me to come out and train her team. And that's how I got started. So since 2018, I've been going into organizations, municipalities, industry, et cetera, and helping them better prepare to respond in a crisis and get ready for those days when it really matters most, when your comms really matters. So that's what I do now.
And you help them prepare. I want to underscore you ahead of time, right?
Well, and it's not that I'm not there to help anyone in a crisis if they need support. I do a lot for some industry people that don't have on-site crisis communications people. I'll provide advice and guidance, but I'm always COVID taught me a good lesson because I was asked to come in and be a public information officer and information officer for some municipalities. And I stepped back a little and I said, I will come in and support and mentor your team. I will train them on the spot, but I'm not going to be your information officer. I don't know your people. I don't know your community. I don't know your processes. It would not be right to parachute me in a crisis to try to run things. And so I really try to get at that pointy end of the pencil, so to speak, at the beginning to say, bring me in early. Let's talk about how you run things. Let me see what you have. Let me show you some areas of improvement I can help you close some gaps on. And let's get you feeling more confident with the right skill sets to respond. That's my sweet spot.
Yeah.
I say my public safety is my sandbox, and I do a little bit of things in that sandbox, but that's my sweet spot, I would say.
Yeah, I think confidence. I think that's a huge, that's a huge thing in whatever. Often when I talk to experts on these episodes, it comes back to that. Often, I feel like if you're speaking, if you're, in a crisis, there's all kinds of situations where if you cannot have the confidence unless you've actually done the work to kind of get there, I think, or have the experience maybe, have been living through these in the past. But I just feel like it's something companies don't think enough about. And it's really changed a lot because I feel like it used to be like, oh, there might be a crisis that popped up, some natural disaster or something, maybe an executive did something or whatever. But now I just feel like it's every day there's something. And a lot of it is driven by social media, the internet. And so it's just a kind of a different world now. And that's why I feel like it's really important for every single organization, company, any business to have at least something in mind or in place. What happens if this happens to us? And then, just think through that at least.
Well, and I would say to you that crisis communications is no longer a nice to have. It's like an operational infrastructure. It's a requirement. Those communications are operational. And every organization now, they're operating in a risk environment where crises are faster because of what you mentioned, social media, AI. They're more visible because of those tools and technologies, and they're more interconnected, right? When we talk about that poly crisis and how things are happening and they're more interconnected. So it may mean it's not necessarily just your lane that you're in anymore, but you have to think about the merging lanes that are coming into your crisis. And I would say to you that you can't predict every crisis out there, but you can absolutely prepare how you'll communicate when one happens if you actually think through and think past a plan and prepare your teams and practice. The practice is what builds the skills and the confidence. Putting someone into an operational setting for the first time during a major crisis event is not going to instill the confidence they need to be successful. And then we get into that whole mental health element of how we're, managing these teams and what we're doing to these teams. Think about that. It's not just a plan. You have to prepare. You have to practice. You have to review that plan and go through the whole process again and see where there's areas of improvement. So I think there's elements there that people think, oh, you can't predict every crisis, so why bother predict any? Well, because how you respond to that crisis, whether it's a cyber attack or an operational failure or a leadership crisis, it matters. Those first few words and that first inject of how you're going to manage that narrative matter.
Yeah. And I'm going to put up, this was not going to be the first question, but I'm going to go ahead and put it up anyway, because we can't plan for every possible crisis, but is it wise to anticipate the types of crises your organization may face? And I think you have addressed it a little bit there. So
100%. But I would say to you, because I often work in the emergency management space, we talk about risk, threats, and hazards, right? So we're, wildfire, overland flooding, tornadoes, all of those. So yes, there's that. However, I always say, What about those internal risks? What about, leadership risks? What about fraud cases? If you want to really understand what's happening in the world, put in local government fraud and see how many hundreds of cases pop up. Hundreds of cases, some of the most bizarre scenarios. You'll think that could have never happened, and it's true, it's happened. So I always say to municipalities or local governments, like, think through this. But I would say that one of the elements that really comes to mind with that is people say, well, how can I predict, Shawna? That's ridiculous. You can't predict. But if you were, let's just pretend you worked in the chemical industry or the oil and gas sector, or you were a post-secondary school, institution,
Mhm.
nonprofit. If you even followed and looked at incidents happening within your sector, what a great learning environment that is. After action reviews, feedback in the press, communications, that is a constant element that you should be looking at. If it's happened to someone else in your industry, it could darn well happen to you. And what a great way to learn what went well, what did go well, even language. Sometimes I'll even copy language that I really like that someone's used and just tuck that away for a client in the future, what have you. So I think that that's part of it. We have to drop the arrogance that it's not going to happen to us. We'd manage it differently. We're so much better prepared. And that has to go to the wayside, and we have to be realistic. If it's happened to someone else, it could absolutely happen to you. So look outside your box and look inside your industry, outside, to see what could affect inside and outside your organization.
And I would say, and I think you kind of touched on this too, even if it's not the exact type of crisis, it's doing the legwork and kind of going through the motions of preparation for any crisis is going to help you deal with any crisis, right? I mean, at least you've kind of thought through it, and you have maybe, a plan in place that you can refer to. Who am I going to call? Who needs to be involved? That kind of thing. Just even basics.
Well, even grouping it. So I kind of said, we used to talk about individual message maps for different hazards and stuff in the community,
Mhm.
but maybe now you're looking at it. Okay, what if we have something that's a leadership trust crisis? Something happens with the CO response,
Yeah.
or there's a gap in some language that we used or something we shared, or maybe it's an operational failure becomes this public crisis over here, or it's a misinformation driven crisis. Like maybe we are categorizing that in our plans to think about how we'd respond to those. So it's not specific, so that people don't throw out the playbook if they say, oh, this doesn't align exactly like we said. That happened in COVID, right? There was a health authority, I want to say it was in a US state, but I can't remember which one. And they had been practicing the same pandemic plan for over 20 years. 20 years of
Whoa.
annual reviews. When COVID hit, the leadership at the time of the board threw it out and said, oh, well, we didn't write this plan. We need to start from scratch. Who does that in the middle of a crisis? I was like, are you kidding me? So my point is, at least if you have a starting point and how you're going to do it, and you don't have to rewrite the whole plan, but how are we getting approvals? Who's going to be our
Mhm.
spokesperson?
Mhm. Mhm.
What tools are we using? Where are audiences going for information? If you have done that legwork and the groundwork, you will be 100% more prepared to respond to that crisis.
Yeah. And you mentioned how the different types of crises, because when I
Mm-hmm.
was writing my book, I was like, I really need to make sure that, I mentioned, because I think when somebody thinks of a crisis, they might have like, just an idea of one or two things, but it's so many things. I mean, it could be financial, it could be a natural disaster, it could be like, an executive misstep. It could just be any number of things. A customer complaint can go viral. It's hard to.
You don't know, and what people need to understand is that the response and how it's perceived, the crisis is not just about the incident itself. It's how you communicated during that response. That's what people are taking. That's what they're evaluating you on. When I work in the emergency management space, I tell a lot of firefighters, you can have a textbook case of putting out that major industrial fire or major apartment complex fire, and can save everyone and do a great job on that. But if you haven't communicated what you did during that response to your public, they think you failed. because they're searching for information online. They want to know what you did, how many fire trucks were there, who all responded, was there mutual aid. That is the same with any crisis. We have to think that it's strategic, that your response is part of the crisis response. It's no longer, it's not an add-on. It never was, never should have been. Your communicators need to be at the table right at the beginning when you're discussing how you're going to respond, to help provide that advice and guidance to you. Now, leaders, though, they make the final decision. They may not make the decision. If you go in with some courses of action, here's A, B, and C. This is what I think the consequence will be if you choose A. This is if you choose C. And if your director, your leader, or CEO says, well, I'm going to go with B and morph in a little bit of this and that. It's our job as communicators then to walk away and communicate that. That's our job. Once the decision is made. I have worked with a client, though, that had a real challenge where the leadership seem to want communications to make the decisions. No, that is not our job. Our job is not to write the response for you. Our job is to articulate and convey the communications you want us to share. You make the decision on how the company or organization is going to respond. We will tell you how best to communicate that. We don't make the decision for you. That has happened more often than not sometimes with communicators that get stuck in this space. And if we don't like the decision they make, then our job still is, okay, how do we mitigate what's going to happen because they didn't make maybe what we consider the right decision. But a CEO or leader, Michelle, they may have the big picture. They may understand more than we do, have more information than we do, be privy to things we're not. So they make the big bucks and the decision rests with them. That's why the buck stops there with them.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes when I've watched these press conferences after, a disaster or some kind of a crisis, or, sometimes I feel like egos get in the way, even as far as like who's doing the speaking, who the spokesperson is and what they're sharing. And so that's always an interesting thing to watch as, somebody who, works in the communication space. It's always like, well.
And that does happen because people will, think that, oh, it has to be so-and-so. So if I could talk for a moment, I'm just going to give you the example of we had the terrible tragedy of Air Canada with the Air Canada pilot and co-pilot on the ground in the US, where there were 2 fatalities and they hit that truck, and really sad situation. So the CEO, so thinking about this, Air Canada is Canada's flagship airline. It's based in Montreal, Quebec, where French is the first language. And the CEO gave the message that he gave, said hello, and at the end, thank you for whatever, at the end in French, in 2 or 3 words. But it was only an English delivery, only in English. Now, that did not resonate well with Canadians. It probably did not resonate well with those families who both have that have that situation in place where they're probably French language speaking first. But from a flagship company, a national company in Quebec, people expected a French message. So it really quickly went away where the focus should have been on support and sympathy and compassion and empathy for those families, and quickly moved in this political, hot potato with him being called to Ottawa in front of the Prime Minister, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if he planned to retire, but he is being let go from that position from Air Canada. It's escalated to that. But here's the thing. 5 years ago, there was another incident where the public and the media got very vocal because he did not speak French and he had been apparently taking French courses. I don't know all the ins and outs from this. This is me piecing it together as well with the public information available. But in my head, I thought, if you were the community, I saw that whole thing as a communications failure. Because if your CEO is if that's your worst case scenario, and of course it is, a plane crash or an incident involving your crew, and you're going to have to deliver in both official languages, you, by gosh, better have someone available to talk. So even if it was the CEO gave in English and you had a deputy speak in French, or you handed that CEO a very phonetically written note that he read on camera verbatim, people would have understood. But there was none of that. And I just kind of felt that maybe the comms, now maybe they told him he needed to do that and he refused. You can't control that either. But I just thought we saw an issue over here and that we repeated it during a real crisis, and look how it landed.
Yeah. And such a simple that, sometimes I feel like you can't, things that you get criticized for, maybe you really couldn't foresee, but this seems like something a very simple,
Well,
fix,
and I
like,
felt badly for him because they were saying like he should have been able to speak French. He's been taking it for 5 years. As a mother of twin daughters, who are both 31 now, so they're young, they're adults, right? Who went through in the same house, raised the same way with French speaking parents. My husband's more bilingual than I am. French immersion their whole life. I have one daughter who is a French immersion teacher today. She speaks French every day. She married her husband is francophone. They speak French in the house. My other daughter can read and write, but she would never speak it publicly. I understand that not everyone has a linguistic ability. I guess that's my
Mhm.
point. Two
Yeah.
kids, same house, same exposure, very different capabilities in a second language, and their French is a second language. But I hope they don't listen to this podcast and get offended there. But but all that to say, so I get it that happens. This case I thought was preventable.
Yeah, absolutely preventable, and just kind of like a 101. But see, this is the thing. If you don't talk through, think through, and plan for, prepare for, I don't know that maybe you just in the moment, it's easy to just kind of react and you don't maybe think about these things. So
Yeah,
you're stressed, so that's
yeah,
why I
you're
also
stressed.
think
Yeah.
there's a benefit to planning and thinking through when you're calm and there's nothing really happening that's got you all stressed out. So we did have a question, and I think we actually had a couple questions, but I'm going to
Ooh, woo.
save one for a little bit. Because she was dropping the question and was going to listen later. So Susan says, you mentioned practicing the crisis response. What are your thoughts on the multi-day session where a few select people are working through a scenario, or do you recommend other ways of practicing?
Well, I'm gonna say that I think it depends. It depends what your industry is and how you're managing that. So here's a case in point. I remember that a lot of exercises are just a few hours. It's really easy to respond and get everything right in a couple hour exercise. Oh, and X, we're done, da da da. What do we do in that 3 hours? And we're not actually practicing because we normally say, oh, we wrote a news release, but we didn't really, right? Oh, we put this out, we did a news conference, but we didn't really. We just said we were going to do it. We talk about what our next steps are. We don't actually go through the motions. And I think it was a hydro company in Ontario at one time. I remember listening in on a webinar that they did, and they talked about how they started to run their exercises 24/7. And they did that because it took them 24 hours to get electrical back up, like to get the lines back up. That was their average time for a response. So they realized we should be practicing that. But what it forced them to do was they did 3 shifts of 8 hours, and it forced their employees to now be outside of work hours. So now you had impacts to people that maybe had children at daycare that needed to be picked up, or you had impacts for people that were caring for their aging parents, people that were single parents. You had a whole lot of impacts in there. So I think part of running those exercises for multi-days is making sure that your employees have a family care plan, that they've thought through, if this happens, if I'm critical and I'm being asked to come in and work overtime to manage this crisis, who do
Mhm.
I have in my care network that can help me? The military and the Army, we had one. I didn't live near family. I had to have that articulated for the military. When 9/11 happened, I actually had to execute it and call on people in my plan. So I think that's one thing. It gets people outside of the crises don't just happen in work hours. So that's where more than a 24-hour cycle will work. But when you have a multi-day session, you must be replacing those teams and backing up those teams. When you
Mhm.
say just a few select people are working through it, that doesn't make sense to me. Every person who's a lead needs a shadow. They need a backup person that's coming into drills, observing how decisions are made, how the cadence of comms is going or the workflow is going. That's how you train your teams for when you're not there. And that's a real risk in organizations where you have people that have worked for a long time, but they don't recognize that they have all the corporate crisis knowledge in their heads, and then they retire. And then Bob retires and Sue retires, and they all retire at the same time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's no one left holding the bag, right? So I personally like the idea, especially for communications, of a really focused tabletop exercise that you walk through scenarios for a lunch and learn. So you do it for 90 minutes. Here's the scenario. Let's talk through. Do we have this in our plan? How would we do this? Let's walk through this. This is what I saw in the news that happened to somebody else. How did they do this? I think they're more effective sometimes than the multi-day plan, unless you're going to bring in different different teams to come in and take over and have to do a transfer of authority and a transition. I hope that answers. But I think sometimes comms doesn't always get engaged, and I'm always saying to my clients, why aren't you running your own comms crisis comms lunch and learn series every month? Just take something out of the news and say, let's do a brown bag lunch, or I'll bring in lunch. Let's talk through this. How would we have answered this and responded to this? I think there's better learning in those.
I think you brought up an important point too, that you need to revisit occasionally, because people do retire or change jobs or leave the company. And so that's why I know sometimes people will say, well, we have a crisis communications plan. It's on the shelf, it's in the file, whatever. But they haven't looked at it in over a year or much longer than that. So it's not something that's, set it and forget it, we're done. And
well, and I hope that answers Susan's question there, because I will say to you that the risk of I think the risk of that element that I shared of having that corporate knowledge and that crisis knowledge leave with the retirees is a real challenge. And I recently, in the last couple of years, did a review and brought in a team to help me with an industrial review. And I made that their number one risk. And they were shocked because they hadn't really thought that everyone in that company had been there over 24 years, 25, 26 years, and they were all coming up to the golden retirement age at the same time. And they hadn't really thought about succession planning in the crisis space. So it's a risk, right?
It is a risk. And I think that's a good way to frame it too, because I don't think, again, I feel like a lot of times it is very like, well, it would be nice, but like
when I worked at Dow Chemical, and we had a public affairs on-call team, the on-call team was made up of HR people, process operators, engineers, folks in the control rooms. They were not comms people. And so but I couldn't do everything myself. I needed a team. I had to build a team from what I had out of non-communicators. But every time we had a drill, I would bring whoever was on call with me into that ECC, what we call it, the EOC backup center. I would bring them in there because I wanted them to observe and not have their first time ever stepping in there as a day Shawna's on holidays somewhere and they have to step in for me and not know where to sign in or how to do anything. Oh, yeah. I wanted them to feel comfortable in the environment, and they would normally be my scribe, because if you're writing everything and trying to do everything, it's really hard to keep up with all the forms ICS wants you to do, and we were using ICS as our response model, so they would be my scribe, but they were there really to kind of just take it all in.
That's so smart too. And I liked what you said too about having, a backup, having someone shadow, because sometimes people are not there, they're out of town or whatever. So I mean, it's just important to have, a team and not just, a couple people that know what's going on, because it's going to be really hard again in the stress and the time constraints and to really communicate what needs to be
and what needs to be done, right? And it's very rare. Like, I could probably count on one hand the times that a crisis happens when all the right people are there during work hours and immediately available to answer your questions, right? Because that never happens. So you have to plan for the realities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe we will just answer questions, because there were people that sent questions in ahead of time too. So
yeah, sure.
Let's just do that, and then we'll see. If we have time, we'll go back to my scripted questions and hit those. But I think you're hitting a lot of the points that are important, as I'm not surprised at all by that. But so Kathy wants to know what to address for smaller, newer businesses. What should they be doing to ensure they are crisis ready? So, and I know that Kathy often works with startups. So that might be something.
You know what? First of all, I'm going to say, Kathy, that I have watched really well-equipped, resource, large budgeted, if that's even a word, I don't know if I can use that word, organizations completely mess up a crisis response. And I have watched a team of like 1.5 comms people save their community from a grass fire, both here in Alberta. And the difference is the smaller community, although small and mighty, they had a plan and they understood what to do. So I would say to you that if you don't have a plan yet, understand your top 5 risks. What could happen to you as a new business continuity, water main. You're a hair salon and a water main breaks. What does that do for your business? You own the local sub shop and someone puts something viral on social media about finding a bug in a sub and they make it up. It's totally malicious, right? What are your top 5 realistic risks? Think about those. Start planning with those ones in mind. Then think about who's going to speak in the organization. Define the roles. Who's going to do what? So you don't all scramble together and try to do the same thing. Then I would say build a couple of message maps. I really lean into having message maps. I teach that a lot. Every workshop, I teach a message map. 30 words per message. In a crisis, and we want to talk with empathy and compassion, the public want to know 3 things. What happened? What are you doing about it? And what do they need to do? And you always give them something to do, whether it be to follow you on your social media or on your website, which is another thing. Any business should have a website, and the website should always be your comms hub in a crisis. You can use your social media and anything else you have, your YouTube, what have you, but always link everything back to your web as your crisis communications hub. You can put a lot more information on a website than you can in a post, right? I would also say that understand who has to approve your messaging and how you're distributing your messaging. So even if you don't have a plan, if you just looked, I kind of wrote this before, but know your top risks, define who's speaking, know how to get things approved and out to who needs to see it, and then build some message maps for those scenarios. That's a great start. I mean, a larger organization should have I don't mean comprehensive in 100 pages, and I've seen that. I'm talking a usable, effective plan, because and you've probably seen them too, Michelle, where a plan has all this gunk and all this stuff in it. In a real crisis, it shouldn't tell you what you're supposed to be doing. It should be showing you how to do it.
Right.
Linking it to a template you can use as a holding statement, linking it to your message maps, not just to say, put out a holding statement. No, show me how to do that. Spell it out and give me a draft. Have it all in there. So that's how I would say that you can start, even with a small little business, newer business, smaller businesses. Those businesses have just as much opportunity for success as a large enterprise, because in some cases more so. There's less layers to go through for approvals, but that's where I would start.
Yes, fewer layers. That's true for approvals. That's very true. I feel like that's, with any messages at all, any press releases or anything. And then, legal. We need to have somebody from the legal team, of course, in our crisis team, right? Like that needs to be, and they need to be, really, they can't be taking, a week to approve things. It has to be really fast. And you have to be careful what you say. Like, that's why legal's there. So.
And depending on that legal thing, just to say to you, one of the things we did at Dow was, because it did, our mothership was in Midland, Michigan. I'm in Alberta, and when we used Everbridge as a notification system for near neighbors if there was ever anything. And the one thing we did is we had our legal team actually approve 5 holding messages for us that were already in our system, of the 5 top risks we had. Thankfully, I never had to use them, but they were legally approved in advance. And I had authority to release those right away, because I don't have time. If I'm dealing with some kind of chemical situation, I don't have time to be getting an approval from hours away, right? It's life safety. And so I would say to you that even if you went as far as to say to get a legally approved holding statement that says, we understand about incident X. We are looking into it right now. More information will be shared once we've verified facts. Watch this space or go to our website for more updates. whatever it is you're going to do, something simple that gives no details, that you can very quickly say to your lawyer, I want to be able to have something that's ready. So I just have to fill in the blank. I may not even be sharing what the incident is, but I'm making my audience know I'm aware there's something percolating here. We are
Yeah.
on it. That alone buys you time, valuable time, because that's the one thing in a crisis, you don't have a lot of time to make decisions.
Yes, I love these tips. See? I mean,
Come to
I
Shawna for more tips on the.
it's such great advice though. I mean, it's to me, it's somewhat common sense, but if we don't talk about it and remind people how important it is, again, they're not going to necessarily take it seriously until they're in a crisis, and then it's really too late. I mean, like it's the
Well,
ship
and
sailed and
yeah,
you gotta deal then. So
that's what happens, right, when we're dealing with this. I mean, I think it was the Edelman Trust for 2026 report kind of highlights that people are questioning what's real, who to believe. Like, it's getting harder and harder, and that puts a lot of pressure on organizations to show up clearly and consistently. It's not a one and done. It's not put your leader out there once and talk about it and then don't do it.
yeah,
It has to be a cadence of information that is shared. And maybe you're saying it's the CEO is going to speak twice a day or 3 times a day, so people can anticipate when to get that. Those leaders need to be visible, and they need to speak directly to the people, because people don't want to. They don't want a statement. They want to hear from a person, right? And
right.
and they have to inject some of their personality into those comments. And I think, we talk about trust and that foundation, and I think it's really important that we understand that you don't build trust in a crisis. That's not what's happening. Trust, if it's already uncertain, how you're communicating, you're validating whether you have trust with your audience during that crisis. If you haven't been building it and communicating effectively beforehand, you're not going to be starting it during that crisis, period.
Well, that was a question on my list, was how can a crisis be an opportunity to build trust? And so you're saying the trust needs to be there first, ahead of time.
Well, it does. You have to, it can. I mean, it is a bit of a trust test, I would say.
Mhm.
But I would say you could build on that trust, or if you have to, if you're starting from scratch, getting out there early, getting out there first, getting out there fast with
Mhm.
factual information, frequent information, understanding
Yes.
that it's not, like I said, the one and done. That helps reinforce that. How you're responding to your crisis says a lot
Mhm.
about you and your leadership in the organization. And
Mhm.
and remember that how we organize information inside our organization gets amplified when we go outside the organization. So if you're not coordinating information internally, if you haven't told your employees, if you don't have the right people at the table weighing in, HR, legal,
Yeah.
safety, whoever it may be, if you
Yep.
don't have the right people talking and getting that aligned, it's not going to look aligned when it goes outside. It's just a thing. They go like mittens, hand in hand. They have to be they
How
have
many
to be there.
times does that happen, to your point about the internal audience? Because I feel like there are times when there's something going on and they've made a public statement, but people inside the company weren't aware until they heard it on the news or saw it on social.
And they don't understand the cascading impacts of what happens. Like, I did this exercise down actually near Niagara Falls in the fall, and we had an entire municipality team of administrators in the room, and we had them sit in their direct, like, their groups, right? Like, oh, you're public works and you're HR and you're whatever. And we went, so I gave a scenario, and then we walked it around the room, and I said, okay, so HR, what are you thinking now? How is this impacting you? And blah, 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 blah. Social services, what are you thinking about? And we walked it around the room, and there was this kind of aha moment when people realized, just because a leak into the river, I have it over here in environmental operations, does not mean it doesn't impact all of these other groups in our organization. And sometimes people don't recognize what other information or what others need from an information standpoint to make informed decision. And my point was, share it all, share it early, and let those directorates pick out the pieces they need to do their work and to prepare for any follow on with this crisis. And I think that happens a lot. People think, oh, it's just us. We just only three of us need to know about this. When really the impact starts to expand and you're in a situation now where you're not unified in your communications approach. You don't have the same consistent messaging. Left hand and right hand don't know what each other are doing, and the public sees that. So then they get concerned. So
Yeah, they get
happens
nervous.
often.
They don't trust. And again, the humanity, having the human be out there and show some humanity, that helps build trust. I just, yeah, see, I don't, again, people are not thinking like this. I think it's just easy to keep your head down and hope nothing happens. But you know, when it does, it's better to have at least thought through some of these things.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And if I would say to you, we have a lot of issues that happen across organizations. And one of the elements that we should always look at is keeping an issues matrix and tracking those issues. Sometimes they don't need air to be amplified, but sometimes they do. They need to be tracked through an organization, and people need to understand the steps taken because, oftentimes a crisis is an issue that wasn't managed properly. So we knew about it. We watched it percolate across the
Yeah.
screen, and then all of a sudden it blows up because we didn't manage it, we mismanaged it. So that's another thing. If you're in an organization that doesn't keep a risk matrix of things coming in, that's a really good starting point too.
I'm taking notes. So oh, I'm gonna post another question that was
Yeah.
sent to me ahead of time, because I did ask on social media if anybody had questions, because I knew that you were very
Mm.
interested in answering what's on people's minds. So that's what we're gonna kind of focus on here. So, and this is something that I've talked a little bit about, is how has AI slop and manipulation changed the crisis communications playbook?
I wrote some notes on this, so I'm not being shifty, but I want to just take a point at my notes here. I think AI has. So first of all, I just want to say that where we were even 5 months ago with AI and where we were today is like 10 years past where people thought we would be the experts, right? If
Mhm.
you tried to create an image on AI for anything 5 months ago, you'd never get it without spelling errors. A third hand, a third eye, like it always looked weird, right? Nowadays, if you try to do that, I'm telling you, the technology has advanced so far, it is sometimes unrecognizable what you're dealing with. So there's that fake news and that AI, that negative side of AI is certainly there. I would say that now the problem is anyone can create the credible looking content, right?
Yeah.
We saw this in British Columbia wildfires last year. We had imagery that went out all across social media platforms suggesting that a fire was way beyond the scope and scale that the officials were sharing. And they had these water bombers in the photo. But the water bombers, if you look closely, were not water bombers. They were actually part of our Canadian Forces Snowbirds aerial team of Tudor jets with the on there. They had like completely, anyone that could recognize that said, oh, that's fake news. But the province had to come out and put out official statements about the misinformation out there. So,
Right.
so I would say to you that the problem with AI is that it takes time. We have to be really watching misinformation and correcting it out there. When we see AI generated content that's not real, that's not credible, we have to be
Mhm.
going back to the sources, and it takes time on a team to manage that. We
Yeah.
have to monitor those digital spaces in real time. It's not, I have to have someone on it, whether you're hiring a group to do that or you have staff that can do that aren't directly involved with your response, that can be given a secondary duty. They can do it from home, right? You don't need them in your ops center. I think those are key areas. But the other side of that coin is you really need to have your official channels made very clear on the onset. I go back to, if it's your website or whatever social media, the
Mhm.
media you own. Think about that. The media you own, your YouTube channels, your social media channels, your Facebook page. I mean, I would go insofar as to say media is a tool in the toolbox, but they are not the only tool anymore. You could be getting out a message to your people much more quickly, much faster with
Mhm.
your narrative using your own mediums than overusing a press conference opportunity, for an example. I'm thinking about, was it the Delta Airlines crash, when the CEO was put it out on YouTube before he did the press conference in Washington, D.C. the next morning, and he had something out there that night, which was great. I mean, people are starting to recognize that they have some power in the way the message is put out there with people. So I
Mhm.
would say, if you establish those trusted channels with people, it helps people start to think about AI. And you can also, during your crisis or emergency, be reminding people.
Yeah.
I suggest this in every warning message, follow only trusted and verified sources.
Yes. Yes.
Follow us here. Follow this trusted and we are only sharing trusted and verified information on our website, which you can find here. Like, and even saying, please don't share unverified information. Like,
Right.
there's ways that we can, I don't want to say subliminally, but we can insert kind of that
Yeah.
messaging to remind people, oh, this might be fake. This might be AI. But it
Yeah.
is a challenge. I don't know if I'm answering that as well as you wanted me to, but it has changed the way we do crisis comms, for the good in some way, but this is that negative side for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a challenge, but if if your CEO or your spokespeople are never out there, you can't expect your audience to get to know them. And then if this did happen where somebody created a deep fake and put it out there of your CEO or whoever it might be, they're not as likely to know because they have nothing to compare it to, right? If your audience knows and trusts you, they're probably going to spot the fact that, wow, this looks very much like this person, but this is not the kind of thing that they would ever say. And I know this because, I've followed this company, I followed their executives, and I know that this is not something they would ever say. And then, yes, check their official channels. Follow, a lot of times, if you just consider the source, that's always something to think about. But again, we're probably preaching to the choir a little bit here because I think people
Well,
in comms know better than to just trust any old thing that's out there. But,
but we can get caught too, right? Like, we can get caught. Of, as a few years ago, there was something about military suicides. As a veteran, I didn't look at the source. I just shared it. And I had someone, actually, it was a bit embarrassing. Actually, it was a military public affairs colleague of mine messaged me and said, Shawna, you realize that that's fake news. Like, that's not the right statistics, right? You have to go here. And I'm like, I didn't realize that. It looked legit. It looked legit. I didn't think twice. I shared it. And so then I went back and said I was sharing false information. This is actually what our Canadian statistics and US statistics are involving veteran suicides, death by suicide. But it was a learning for me that anyone can get caught. And I would
yes.
say to you that one little point on that is, when I get some people give me a little pushback when I say use the media you own. You own an iPhone, and for $40 on Amazon, you can buy a lapel mic and a tripod. You can be equipped to take a video of your CEO in the moment and put it online for like under $50. No one has an excuse to be able to have that capability to do that.
Right. Yes. And I think another thing is, if your audience knows you, they're also going to come to your defense if something occurs that seems off, or, they're going to be like, no, we are going to defend this person without even being asked, because we trust and we have a relationship, and, it's all established ahead of time. So it's just another, like, reminder not to hide, and just to be transparent. I think that's what
Be
builds
transparent.
trust.
And if I can say something, oh my gosh, I don't think I have it here. I'm a bit embarrassed that I don't have this one book in front of me, but I read in this chapter of this book, it was an industry example, but I think it could be work for anyone. It talked about how your website often you open up a website and your landing page talks about who you are, what products you sell, et cetera, et
Mhm.
cetera.
Mhm.
And this company what she was recommending, this author, that you actually start with what you do locally in your community. what you do for public engagement. Start with that.
Mhm.
And so I delivered that at a webinar not long ago, and lo and behold, there was an incident here. I was looking at, it was a spill somewhere, oil and gas. I went to their website and they had done that. They had made their landing page all about a girls hockey program they were supporting and all of this. And it just, I thought, okay. And then they had information news over here. And I thought, all it did was give me a momentary second to think, oh, they do good in our community. You know, that's a mind shift, right? Because I was going in looking for the blood. I was like, what happened here? What was this? What happened with this leak? Another
Yeah,
one? Are you kidding me?
yep.
But I was immediately diffused that little bit of, ire, because I saw them in my community light. This is what they do. This is the good things they do. I thought that was really good advice for anyone that is in that space that can actually manage that.
Yeah. As long as it doesn't appear like they're just
No,
doing it just to
yeah, it's all it's saying is they had that compartmentalized on the website already, and now they just brought it to the front, to the landing page, and I just, the way they did it was very professional, and it didn't seem, icky to me at all. So I
yeah.
thought, oh, good job on that. But anyways, there's different ways to do that. But I think a lot of organizations that have these engagement opportunities with their communities, these are chances to promote that internally and externally. Employees want to be proud of the companies they work for. They want to be seen in communities. And
Yep.
I think that's an element there that sometimes we don't, I don't want to say we do it for the photo op. I'm not suggesting that at all, because I think it
Right.
always looks contrived. But I think there's an opportunity there to talk about those elements of your business a little more than sometimes we plan that we do.
Yeah, and they make great PR,
Great PR. Call
fodder,
Michelle.
so
She'll have you organize your event or promote that afterwards. 100%.
there's always something you can do with it, so it depends, but anyway, I do like that idea. I just like the idea of building the trust, and I think people are just, starving for humans, human, emotion, human stories, human, humanity, and in the messaging and the, I don't know, I feel like we're, that's obviously a lot of that's gone away because of AI, and I feel like people are kind of coming back being like, okay, like we crave this, we need this.
Yeah, they want authentic engagement. Like they want something authentic. They want people to be
Mhm.
real. They don't want it too polished. They don't want. They'd
Yeah,
rather have a CEO step up there and say, "I know that this has been. I can only imagine how hard this has been for the families that have been impacted. We are working closely to try to support them in every way we can. This is what we're doing right now." Like,
yeah,
we're talking about what we know, what we're doing, and what the next steps are. That's the role of the CEO. And this is what we're going to do next. We're going
yeah,
to start this investigation. We're going to be looking into this. We're going to review our HR, policies on harassment, whatever it may be. There has to be an action. They have to take ownership of that situation and demonstrate they're learning from it and
mhm,
what they're going to do to kind of mitigate it. We never say it'll never happen again. I would say to mitigate it from happening again. But I think
yeah,
that's what people want: leadership. They want leadership.
leadership, yes. We have a couple more questions. So here's
Susan
one
is
from
she's got a
Susan.
lot of questions. Bless her.
Well,
I love Susan. It's great.
so I'll read it, and you can think about what you might say here. With the easy availability of AI, what do you think of using it to help with comms during the planning process? Things like coming up with scenarios, confirming audience segments, comms channels, etc. During a crisis, thoughts on having AI pressure test your messaging and identifying any gaps. Does it have value?
100%. If you're a communicator that hasn't delved at least into using AI, either A, I think you maybe weren't telling me the whole truth, or B, you need to get on that train, because I'm using it and I tell clients I use it for a scenario, to build certain scenarios to help me find gaps, identify gaps, message mapping. It can help, but I agree 100%. It's part of the preparedness phase. It's not necessarily part of the response phase, because you need to have human centric emotional language used, and AI is it's not there yet. I don't think it's there yet, and I feel that that's a real challenge. We've seen cases where messages have gone out and the bottom says, you're getting an active assailant on campus alert, and the bottom says ChatGPT, and I'm like, what is happening here? people do not, that's not what they want right now. And I think that's inappropriate use of that. But AI is a tool. It's a tool like anything else, but it is not, it has to be a well, what's the word I can use? Supervised tool. I think it can be used as an assistant in that way. But the language, you know, if you can take your messaging and your message maps and you can socialize those internally or with the intended audiences, take them to one of your, if you have an HR, you know, we used to have an employee communications advisory panel at Dow. They would review those messages sometimes for us. Does this make sense? Does this not make sense? Review it with your intended audience, send it out to your networks and get that feedback in advance. That's what's really critically important. During the crisis itself, yes, it can assist in some ways if you prompt it properly. If you're constantly prompting it to say, what have I missed? My favorite thing is, what have I missed here? What have I forgotten to include? Is there an audience I'm not addressing? If I'm doing it for a scenario and stuff, and I'm giving people different roles in the scenario and stuff like that, that's how I would use it. But I am always nothing goes out that is not reviewed and double checked and verified.
Yes.
I will even ask it, okay, if you're going to give me an example on that, cite it for me so I can go to make sure it's actually a true citation. 6 months ago, you were not getting that out of Chat GPT 5.3, but you know what it was then. But I think nowadays it's getting better. I like it for consolidating a report or consolidating an after action review. Can you identify the top communications challenges they had and show me the page in the paragraph? So maybe I'm not scanning the 300-page document, but I'm able to do that. That's for me the value add. But I think you just have to be careful how you use it and be aware that it's a powerful tool, and you want to be careful that you're not putting sensitive information in there that can get out. And you know, proprietary information or confidential information for sure too is a challenge.
That's what I always worry about, is the confidentiality, because we sign those NDAs with our clients, and we just have
100%. You never want to be caught with that. And if I'm doing something and I do a report, say like a strategy session, and I'm doing that, and there's no names, no nothing, I may use a certain version of AI to find any gaps, identify gaps. I will always tell the client the final review without any, you know, attribution was used to identify any gaps with the use of AI. Like, I will tell them up front. If they don't want me to use it, they'll let me know. But normally that's exactly how I'll write that. But it's very generic. It's not talking about a specific place or person. It's a generic kind of conversation. But I think you have to be careful with it.
Yeah, that's good advice. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure do.
That came in ahead of time.
Yes.
This is a little bit of a unique question, I feel, but and I can expand on you know, on it if necessary. But so how do you plan for a crisis when your organization or business is in constantly in a state of crisis? You know, like they just operate in kind of a chaotic environment or industry, or you know, it's just often that they don't, you know, it's just, yeah.
Constant framework there. That, well, I think what's really particularly important is understanding, is it constant chaos, depending on what the sector is, right? Are you dealing with the same issues constantly coming up? Is it repeated crisis coming up? Are they truly crises that have like an impact on people and on the organization that's impacting how you operate daily? I mean, some organizations, I would say the military was very high tempo. We had high tempo operations all the time. We were constantly go, go, go. It was constantly something, managing issues, managing this and that. But really, I would say crisis kind of was brought in or kind of interjected when we had a fatality situation or something like that. So high tempo can be one thing, and it can feel like you're in crisis, but I think it's, first of all, defining what that looks like for your organization. Defining if you have issues matrix and you're managing those issues well, so maybe you can mitigate some of the crisis impacts that are happening there. I would also say that it's exhausting. working in that high tempo environment and having to be on all the time. Like, it's exhausting. Take care of your mental health, take care of your teams, make sure they're
Mhm.
getting downtime and rest and all of that good stuff. And also, maybe there's an opportunity to educate leadership. So, what I mean by that is, I used to have a boss, and he would, when I get calls before 7 o'clock on my Blackberry, I'd know, oh, it's going to be a bad day. And he'd be like, oh, Major Bruce, we've got a crisis. And I'd be thinking, and he'd tell me what it was. And I'd be like, this isn't a crisis. This is an issue. I can manage this. It's not a crisis. I don't need to bring anyone else in to support this crisis. Because in the military, you could always pull in resources, right?
Mhm.
But I had to educate people on what the difference was. In an issue, we have time. We have time to create holding statements, media response lines. We have time to bring in all the experts and think through what a good response is. An issue gives you time. I've written more holding statements and media response lines. There's probably a filing cabinet full of them that I never used because it never got to the point of the media finding out a question. The other side of that, if it's a crisis and I need to be responding right now, it's a different approach. Right. So
Mhm.
I felt I had to kind of educate my leadership on what the difference was and how we categorize them in public affairs. And that
Right.
really helped me because it started that they wouldn't tell me anything and I was never at the table. Then they were telling me everything and I was always at the table. And then I was like, oh, okay, I got to find the balance here. And I always say, just tell me what it is and I'll tell you what else I need to know. And I'll let you know if it's going to be a crisis or not, because I'm the closest to the public and the media here. So it was,
Right.
but it took education because most people, they don't know what we do, right? They don't know. They're like, oh, communicate. What is that, right? Like, oh,
It's better to just tell us everything, and we'll
I
decide.
tell me everything, and I will triage the information I need to
Right.
cherry pick out to use.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you. And sometimes they would tell me stuff, and I'd be like, oh, I think that's going to be an issue. And they're like, what? Like, why would that be an issue? I'd say, well, because, in the community, we've had this, and this percolating, and this has happened over here. And now we've had this. Now we had this onto it. That's another layer. I think this could be a problem. We better have some media response lines. And I've had some senior people pull me aside and said, I would have never considered that, Shawna. That's why we bring you here. And I think, okay, it's taken me
I
a couple of
that's
years to get there.
that's why I love to have you here, because I think that a lot of people are not going to think the way that you do, and that's what the value that you bring. And it's your insight is so valuable, is so helpful, because I just think most of us are not thinking this way most of the time. So even those of us in comms, we're not always focused on this. So it's
Ask
really
oh, ask my
great.
husband. I'm the glass half empty gal. He says, "Oh, you always." I am always thinking about the risk. That is me. We go camping. I'm the one that's giving all my friends fire extinguishers for the trip. It's like I am always thinking about the risk and trying to be prepared. But I would say to you, that whole thing. Tell me everything. Let me triage the information. Our job in communicate. I always used to say to my teams, our job is to make the other person look good. Our job is to make
Right.
our leadership and our organization
Yeah.
look good. I would say that to my boss, sir, I can't do that if you keep me in the dark. If you don't get into trouble, I can't say the right things to the media or take the right calls here. I can't mitigate
Yeah.
this. You need to tell me what's going on.
Yeah, I love that. Our job is to make you look good.
You look
Love
good, right?
that.
And
But we
and
can't
that takes
do it
trust,
if
right?
you withhold.
And you only have to do it once or twice. You only have to save their bacon a couple of times or really show them what you can do in that calm space. And then
Mhm.
you get the other time, then they go the other way and they bring you in for everything. But I'd much rather be at the table and be able to leave when I can instead of having to always bring my own chair to the table. I always used to say, invite me to the party.
Oh
I'll
my
bring my own chair, my own loop bag, my own hat. I'll just be there. But it
God.
is a critical thing is you got to have that relationship and work on building that trust with your leaders.
I feel like leadership is probably gonna be leaning on PR and comms folks more than ever, because they get caught, maybe they weren't prepared to speak and they got caught while they were at an event or out in public somewhere, and they're,
Misstep, right?
yeah, but if they're prepared, it would, they would be prepared to in any scenario, basically, if they, you know If they had a good relationship with their
If they had a good relationship, and if you're saying, and that's our job, I sometimes used to hand my boss, my site director, off with like little, I'd say, here's some key messages for today, and he'd go, what do I need these for? I said, there's a big media presence at this event, and they may
yeah,
ask you some questions.
yeah, yeah,
Here's some things you might want to think about. And he'd be like, oh, okay. And then he'd come back and say, I had to use that. He said, I actually used it for
yes,
some business associates. So then we
yeah,
started a little pro forma. If you let me know what you need or where you're going and stuff like that. Sometimes we need to be proactive, right? To be reactive in communications. And that's just our job. Crisis for sure, right? But
yeah,
in everyday communications too, when we start to build those seeds of trust with doing things like that and making ourselves accessible and available and supportive, it helps build that,
yeah,
I think, that
yeah,
foundation.
yeah. We're on their side.
Yeah.
We're on the client side, the executive side, the leader's side. We're on the spokesperson's side, and we are here to help you. So help us help you.
Help me help. And I can't tell you, Michelle, when I was still in uniform in the Army, how many times I'd have to say to people, oh, we didn't want this to go to the media, so that's why we didn't invite you. And I'd say, you know, I'm I wear the same rank and we're in the same organization. You know I'm actually not the media, right? I mean, I work with them for about a tenth of my job, but I'm not actually the media, right? Like just because you tell it to me doesn't mean I'm phoning up a reporter. Like I think I actually had to educate people on that sometimes in my career. I laugh about it now, but at the time it was like head bang wall, like it was, yeah,
I know, crazy.
fun
Um,
times.
well, is there anything else? I know we're kind of over our time, and you've shared
Oh,
so much great
I
stuff. I
just,
take notes.
try to look around you. If you're, or you never want to be in that position of not being prepared. If people are going to be calling on you to respond during a crisis, if they don't have if you listen to podcasts like this and look at the Amanda Colemans out there and the Molly McPhersons and the Philip Bormans and all these people that are sharing information all the time, and follow them on LinkedIn and listen to their free webinars when they have them. If you can identify training opportunities, take them, because really I feel this is a special skill set, and we have to almost identify places to get the knowledge we need to be successful and to be effective. And I think anyone can be both of those things when they think about the preparedness piece of crisis response.
Yes. Well, I mean, as always, I just can't thank you enough.
It's always a pleasure. We could
I
talk
just
all day.
well, and I mean, I just, every time we talk, it's such a, I don't know. I know some of these things I know, but it's just, it's like you don't think about it every day. You're not living it every day. And so it's always good to have the reminders. And then I always learn something new too. So I really, really thank you. And Susan says, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for asking questions. Thanks everybody who joined us today. Please follow Shawna. Shawna, thank you. And I
Thank
hope you
you.
come back again.
I will come back anytime you invite me. I'm here for you. And I appreciate the questions today, the ones in advance that came from the audience and from those online today. Thank you, Susan, for being so engaged. I hope you follow me. We'll have a chat. If you ever need anything, let me know. If there's anything I've mentioned today that that I may have a template of or something, just reach out. I'm very happy to share what I have in those spaces. I really want everyone to be more prepared. And I'm of that vintage, I think, now where it's time to just keep sharing stuff out there to get this next generation ready.
I feel the same way, and, yeah, you're very open, and, we can trust you, and that's so important now. We need trusted experts that we can rely on and turn to, and you are definitely one of those people, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
I'll be back on May 5th. We'll be talking about social media, primarily LinkedIn, YouTube, probably with kind of a focus on B2B, PR and social with our guest, Andy Lambert. So I hope to see you then. Thanks so much for being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.